professor, pastor, current author, and end-of-life doula. Lynn Barger Elliott, welcome into Fair Forward.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
As I mentioned, you're an end-of-life doula. What does that actually mean?
Being a pastor for 30 years, there was always a focus on how to live well, how to flourish, and also this recognition that all of us are going to die. Whether we've prepared for death or not, we usually call people to be with us, to accompany us to last rites,
100%.
to pray at the end, or to celebrate that kind of life. And one of the things that I realized, a couple things I realized in being a pastor, is how we approach or embrace our death, our ending, our finality, our mortality, our limitedness greatly impacts how we live.
I call it the great equalizer, right? Because we're all going to die.
Right, yeah.
And I feel like so many people shy away from that. Like,
Absolutely.
I don't like to see it. I don't like to talk about it. I don't like to think about it. I think, in fact, I'm a faithful person. And I think part of the reason why I'm so faithful is that I'm afraid of dying. I'll admit that I don't want death to be the end. And so for all those reasons, I really try to just block it out of my mind. I feel like, leaned into it and tried to help people to come to grips with what the best way to go about that might be. What made you so interested in it?
There's two things. I think seeing in ministry how few people actually talked about death or embraced it, or like you said, it's a great equalizer. We all know we're going to die.
It's the one certain
thing. Yeah, taxes and death. Like that's
death and taxes.
Yeah. But how few people prepare. Even people in their 90s. Like I had a daughter call me one time. Her mother had died. She was in her 90s. She'd been sick for a while, and she called me and said, I don't know if my mother wanted to be buried or cremated. Would you happen to know if they bought a plot in our church memorial garden where you could bury your ashes? Yeah. And this person had been with her mother for the last 2 months as she was dying, and they never talked about that. And there was just some basic questions. How do you want to die? Do you want to die at home with family? Do you want to be taking every last test and experimental drug, and be in a hospital? How do you want to die? How do you want to live until the end, maybe, is the question. And so few people talked about that I could see families were inheriting conflict because parents had they'd never asked, or they'd been afraid to talk about it. And so the conflict that was left with the family after the person died was so hard to watch.
I can imagine. And the last thing you want to do after somebody leaves us is to be left with like these broken pieces that you have to try and put together.
Absolutely. And a lot of families are left with that. And the other thing, my dad was a pastor as well. So I grew up where he was often called, he did a lot of funerals. So I just knew they weren't necessarily people that I knew, but I knew that death was a part of life. And my mother was a travel guide, so they traveled a lot. And I remember my brother and sister and I were like 8, 6, and 4, and they were going to Israel for 2 weeks. And my dad called us in and to the living room, and he had a folder, and he said, "This is the D folder. It stands for death. And if something happens to us, everything's taken care of. You'll be taken care of. Everything you need to know is in this folder." And we were a little bit...
You're like, I'm 8 years old.
I'm 8 years old. I know, my brother would say, I was 4.
It's funny.
But it was normalized.
Yeah.
And we knew this could happen at any time, which it does happen at any time. And we would be okay. And my parents had thought about it and planned for us, and we would be taken care of. And that's very powerful as a child. It wasn't scary. It was comforting knowing this could happen, but we'll be okay. My
parents, I don't think have ever had that conversation with me, and that's not something we talk about, but I imagine there's a reason why people don't talk about this with their families. Do you think that, it's because talking about their own death is scary to them, or they feel like it's something that they don't even want to think about themselves? Like, why don't more people have these conversations? Well, I think there's a superstition that if you talk about it, you'll somehow coax it into existence. Yeah. And there's, by the way, no scientific evidence that happens, that if we talk about death, that it comes sooner. Really? I think we're afraid. We're afraid to give up. I mean, we talk about fighting for our health and fighting for a cure, and that's really powerful and useful language. But there comes a time when we are simply going to die, and that's
okay, that's the arc of our life. Maybe you're a daughter and you think, if I talk about death, my mom's going to think I'm giving up on her, that I'm already writing her off.
I
That
could
I'm already
absolutely see
planning
that.
for something else. Often people that I talk with, it's the younger generation that's afraid to talk to the parents about it. Or the parents will say, and not always, this is not always true, but the parents will say, my wills or the death folder's on the desk. And people say, no, I don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
But I think we're also afraid it's so unknown.
My father made a comment the other day. It was his birthday. I think it was his 57th. Happy belated birthday, Dad. And he made some
I
comment.
hope you called him.
No, I was with him. I was with him.
Okay, good.
He made some comment at dinner. He was like, yep, I think I'm like 57. I should have like about 30-ish years left. And like, I remember my brother was like, why would you ever say that? But to your point, it feels like older people might be more comfortable. Like, look, I've lived a long life and hopefully I live more, but what's going to happen is what's going to happen. And I don't think we as kids or we as young people really are like ever thinking about those things. And it feels to me like, tell me if I'm wrong, learning how to die well almost enhances the quality of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When well, it's like if you're on vacation, you've got a week, not a year there. You make your decisions differently. You think about how you're going to spend your time, who you're going to spend your time with,
Right.
What you're going to do. And so that dynamic between life and death, I witnessed as a pastor and in life too, of just being so important. And the people that I observed being comfortable with dying and their limitations really knew how to live purposefully and authentically. And I don't know if you know anybody that survived cancer.
How about this? My mother.
The way they talk, the way they think about how they live, there's a difference in
She
the way
approaches
they talk.
everything differently
Yeah.
after being faced with the reality of maybe not being here anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that's very powerful. So that's what very big part of my ministry, to be able to help people think about their death, not be afraid. I mean, we're all afraid. Nobody wants to die. Well, most people don't want to die.
Fair point. Yeah.
But at some point, I need to submit to this because life is no longer I'm no longer a healthy person, or I'm 97 and it's time to say goodbye. Yeah. And everything that we've done, whether we've gone to, when you're in nursery school, you're afraid to go to kindergarten because it's in that big building,
Right.
or you go to middle school, you go to high school, you go to college, you get your first job. I mean, there's transitions that we make all through life, and we've managed, and we think, wow, I did it. I've been equipped for this. So I have to think that death is like that too.
I just want to touch on a point you made about how we don't want to admit defeat, right? I think me personally, being a guy, I consider myself like a masculine person. And I think there's this trope in men, we don't ever want to, let whatever it is win, right? And the same applies to, I think, death.
Yeah.
But more broadly, like last week, I cried last week for the first time in years. I had come out of a therapy session with my wonderful psychotherapist, and she was like, I want you to just try to submit to what you're feeling. Just give up. For once in your life, just give up. And I feel like, there are parallels in the death and also in our own internal feelings. I never wanted to cry because I felt like crying was weakness. And for once, I sat on a bench in Union Square Park and I just said, you know what? I'm going to indulge myself in giving up for 10 minutes. And I did. And it felt amazing. And I just think more broadly, it would be useful if we, as humans, but also as men, allowed ourselves sometimes to just be a victim for 5 minutes. Allow it, let it overcome you, and then move on. I think that's helpful.
I do too. And, interesting use of the word victim, because no one, it's not fair. There's a lot of life that's not fair. And it's not fair that your mom had cancer. It's not fair that people die early. It's not, there's a whole lot of things that aren't fair. And to be able to just say, take time, like you gave yourself 10 minutes, not dedicate your life to that, but just say, I'm going to frame this certain amount of time and just acknowledge that, just feel that. But then that's true, but it's also maybe not fair that you have this most amazing relationship, or,
Completely.
You get to see, you have this great opportunity with your work or whatever it is. I mean, there's
Or
so
even
many,
with this
it goes
show,
both ways. Everything. It
Right.
goes both ways.
It's unfair on the negative, but I'm also blessed with so many incredible advantages.
Right.
And I think sometimes, candidly, I forget the advantages and I focus on what's not fair on the negative side.
Yeah. And blessing is kind of an interesting word that you use, or being blessed. That's actually an unfair, or an unearned gift.
Completely.
And I mean, you're poised to see it. Some people don't see their blessings.
Yeah.
And they focus on their victimhood, which isn't healthy either.
No.
But to focus, instead of focusing on what's really a gift.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, and maybe the last point on this kind of death discussion. I guess I'll ask you bluntly: should I be scared to die?
I don't think so.
Because I am.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to die right now, right?
Well, I
mean,
like being here.
Yeah.
It's all I know.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
It's all you know.
All I
Right.
know is being here.
Yeah. So, everything in our entire universe lives and dies. You would be mirroring a dynamic in all of creation. So things are created that live, and they have an expiration date.
It reminds me of stars in the
Yeah,
universe.
exactly.
Like they come into being, they shine, and then they blow up, and they reintegrate themselves back into the universe.
And they're stardust that is part of the dust in this apartment.
Right, that is part of the microphone I'm speaking into.
Right, exactly. And so that's actually a really beautiful thing. So do you actually end your existence? I don't think so. I mean, whether you believe in heaven or not, or some kind of afterlife, there's still stardust here. So it's not like energy's destroyed. It's going to be here somewhere.
Such a good point. And maybe it's just more afraid of not knowing, or more afraid of change. Right?
Absolutely. All of that is. Yeah.
And I think this is actually a nice segue. You know, you've studied and counseled people through like critical transformational life changes. I am afraid of any bit of change I don't like.
Yeah.
You know, I watch the same TV shows as I did from when I was a kid. I eat the same foods. It's like a joke at work. Like, I'll find a thing I like in a 2-block radius, and then I'll eat it every day for like 3 months, right? And I feel like the same goes for my life. I don't want to do anything different. Starting this podcast was like the biggest leap of faith I've ever taken, and really in my life. And so I guess I would ask you, in the same way that, let's say, people are afraid of dying, like, why are people hesitant to embrace change?
Well, change requires so much
Yeah.
from you. One is the unknown. So that's, but then it should be scary at some point to never change. Like if you had to only eat at that restaurant for the rest of your life.
Yeah, true.
Or this is an amazing apartment, but if you knew, like, I'm never going to live anywhere else the rest of my life, like that should have a tinge
That would
of
be like
fear.
a very bleak outlook
Yeah,
for me.
exactly. Yeah. So there's some exhilaration with change, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is.
Change. I mean, you can see why people stay in the same job. They maybe are in unhappy relationships. They don't lose weight, even though they are, have a heart issue or something, because change takes so much work. It also takes saying goodbye to something and letting go of something, and sometimes people. And so to do that work to change it's really hard. And it's the older I get, the deeper my admiration is for people that create change in their life. I mean, some change is pushed upon us. You know, we lose a job.
Can I say one thing that pushed me to change?
Yeah.
I think one thing that forces people to change is like a deep dissatisfaction with their current state. And for me, I was so unhappy. Maybe unhappy isn't the right word, but I was so dissatisfied with the life that I was leading on the day-to-day. I felt like my back was against the wall. There was no option but to change. I don't believe that I would have started this if I didn't have that feeling. And I'm not somebody that willingly enters into change. I'm more somebody that has to be pushed to do it.
Well, I just want to applaud you for recognizing that, because there are a lot of people that just live with their back against the wall and see themselves maybe as a victim or something, but to actually say, wow, this is really bad. I need to make a change. And a lot of people don't do that.
Really?
So, yeah, I
For me,
applaud you.
it almost felt like I had to. Like there was no other option. But
Oh,
to
I
your
totally-
point, maybe there are people that just say there are no other options, but I'm still not going to do it.
Right. Yeah,
know?
I think people live with dissatisfaction and discontent.
Yeah, I
Those are
think the
people that just-
mindset might be, and the mindset that I had for a long time was, I know that there could be something better on the other side of this scary thing, but maybe I'll do it tomorrow. Or I think I can do one more day of this.
Right.
And when you live that way, days turn to weeks, turn to years. And that was my fear, is that if I don't do it, the days turning to years would turn to a life.
You're absolutely right.
That was my fear.
And there's a huge fear of failing.
That-
Like, hey, I at least can manage my discontent. I can be victorious in my discontent.
Completely. And one of the quotes that I always, say back to myself, I don't know who said it, but the precursor to the genius is the fool. And I had to accept that I was going to be a fool. I was going to stumble around in my ignorance and be naive and just like dive into this thing that I know nothing about. But, I'm still wrestling with actually being okay with that. But I think the first step to me was understanding that, like, if I don't actually start, then I can never get good at it.
Right. And it's a public thing, too.
Very
It's
public.
like you probably, you can't do a podcast by yourself in your closet. Like
I guess
you
you
have
could.
to.
You can do it for
I
yourself.
guess you could. But,
Yes.
but at some point, it's a public move. And
Yeah.
that's true with most change. And so it's not only might you fail, but you might fail in front of a lot of people, and then they'll make. We're all still middle schoolers at heart, right?
It's so funny you say that. And I did a solo episode on this a few weeks ago. It's like I still feel like a kid, and I guess I'd ask you, like, you're a grown woman. Are there still parts of you that feel like
I
you're
still
young
feel
again?
like I'm 29. I got to
That's
figure
good, though.
things out.
No, that's a good sign. Because I think we have this impression that people that are older than us have it figured out. And I think the older I get, the more I realize there's so much that I don't know. In fact, the
Yeah.
older I get, the more I learn that I don't know.
No, yeah. I really thought adulthood would be hitting a plateau.
Yeah.
And like, I'd be like, okay, I have this level of understanding and I get what I need to do or what my purpose is. And I hate to tell you, because life changes and it's like, it's exhilarating work and purposeful work, right? But even retirees, like some of my colleagues and friends are starting to retire. And there's this big angst and question of like, what do I do now? What's purposeful? I still have maybe 30 years left of life. Like how can I create impact that's important? And so it never ends.
Yeah.
And then you die.
I know. It sounds bleak, but I think it's exciting.
I was talking to an African who said, we don't talk about end of life. We talk about life until the end.
I love
that. So
that.
you are living, how do you live courageously, vivaciously to the end?
Yeah.
And that's the goal, right?
That is the goal. And I think that's what I'm trying to do. And I think I thought for a long time, maybe I was living vivaciously, but now that I look back with hindsight and I've taken these new leaps of faith, I'm like, wow, that was great. Now I'm doing this new thing. Imagine how many more new things I can do and try. I feel like once you start to accept and embrace change, future change doesn't seem as scary anymore.
Right. And people start cheering you on because they live vicariously through, wow, you're doing it.
You're
this
exactly
is amazing.
right.
And like, I may not have the courage to do that. Or, wow, Mike's doing it.
Totally.
It's working. So you're modeling for so many people.
Well, thank
And
you.
They do. They do applaud you.
Thank you so much. And for as public as this is, it has been by and large good. I get like 90% of feedback is like, this is amazing. There are a few people that...
I heard the one guy that knocked you off on TikTok.
Yeah, on
That's-
TikTok.
Yeah,
I get killed on TikTok. It's funny, too, because it's a lot of people younger than me.
Well, they don't have the capacity to listen.
No. And I don't think they have the empathy to understand, for as easy as I hope I make this look, how difficult this actually is. Not only like time-wise, just to like get these episodes out, but also like personally to put myself out there. And so to anybody listening, if you think that this comes naturally to me, like it doesn't, but it feels like it's the thing I should be doing. And so I feel called,
Yeah.
It's one of the first times in my life that I feel truly called. And whether that's like a spiritual thing or faith-based, I'm not sure, but it feels like this is the thing that I was put on earth to do.
And
But
that's enviable by
Yeah.
most people. Most people yearn for that conviction.
here's a curveball for anybody listening. You've taught at university and also in a maximum security prison. Can I learn more about that?
Yeah. So I lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the home of Calvin University.
Yep.
And Calvin University had a group of professors that were interested in justice issues. And there was a maximum security prison nearby. And the history is much more interesting than I'm making it. I don't know, I'm trying to paraphrase it in a way. But basically, this was a Christian college, and there's a lot of things that Jesus didn't actually talk about at all. And there's a few things that he did. And one of them was to visit the prisoners and to remember the prisoners, remember the widows and orphans. And so there are several professors that thought, there's a maximum security prison nearby. There's also a lot of research that education makes a huge difference within the lives of prisoners. I mean, you'd put, in this case, 2,000 men in like 3 acres. What could go wrong?
Yeah.
Right.
Everything.
With nothing to do. Yeah. Right. So there's a lot of evidence that education actually reduces violence and it creates purpose for in people's lives. So they started to initiate a proposal with the state of Michigan to create a bachelor program, a BA, in this prison system for people that had life sentences. So these were not people that were being prepared to leave, to go be employable on the outside. These were people that were being trained to be leaders within the prison system.
I thought you were going to say, honestly, this was going to help them reintegrate.
No.
But no.
No, that was not the purpose. The purpose is to kind of be like, salt in this in this culture. And so so you had to apply. You had to, have your GED. You had to apply like any other Calvin student. They said that they kept the same standards. And then you would be, if you were accepted, there were 20 students a year that were transferred to Iona Prison, the Hanlon Maximum Security Prison in Iona, Michigan. So it was a 5-year program, and it was on leadership. And as anything in prison, it's just very, very, very complex and cumbersome and risky and beneficial. But it's a year-round program because there's no real holidays. I mean, professors take holidays, but every day is a day in prison.
Completely.
So Calvin just graduated its first class last year.
That's incredible.
It's amazing. It's an extraordinary program if anybody wants to look it up, the Calvin Prison Initiative.
Yeah, it's incredible. And can I ask you, your experiences with those individuals themselves, did you find that they were eager to learn or, receptive to the course?
No offense to any students out there, but professors absolutely loved teaching in the prison. And the reason is that as a professor, my assumption is that maybe a third of the class has read maybe a third of the reading.
This is like in any class?
In any class.
Okay.
In the prison, those students have read probably 3 times, the assignment 3 times. They've read all the footnotes. They've checked out all the books that are referred to in it. So you have to go in totally on top of your game.
Oh my goodness. I never would have expected, and look, maybe that shows how, naive I am. I would have expected the inverse, right? The students were the ones that have read and the inmates were said, I don't care. Why do you think that? Do you think that's because
they have nothing but time?
Yeah. Maybe it's because they have so much free time. They're like, look, I want to pursue something. I need to learn. I need to, I can imagine that that's actually helpful.
And it was so helpful. They had so much time. So they read, they had nothing else to do, really. And those students in the prison, they were so proud that they got accepted into a college program. It's something they never, ever, ever, ever expected.
I bet
would
you
come
so
to
many of
them.
those individuals don't come from a history of people that went to university.
Never.
Yeah.
Yeah, not all, but most.
Yeah.
And nor did people think they could accomplish much. And so to get into college, they just thought, this is an opportunity that I never thought I would get. And here I have it. I'm not blowing it.
Wow.
And it's a privilege. Like you have, it's one strike, you're out. Like it's a privilege to be in that program. So if you do anything, you're done. You're done.
It's funny. I went to beautiful university. I loved my time there. I sometimes take it for granted. Like I don't realize how lucky I was to go to university, right? And I'm not trying to virtue signal. Like it's a privilege to be able to go and learn. And even if I don't use all that stuff in my job, like I got to have conversations about philosophy and learn how to write. And I did a poetry class. Like that's actually cool. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it was expected of me to go, I think is also another privilege.
Right. And you didn't even consider not going, probably.
No. And in fact, there were times where I was there that I was like, I hate this. This sucks. But like, as I reflect on it now, what an opportunity to go and learn.
Sure.
And to anybody out there that's in school right now, I think it's a privilege to be there.
Absolutely.
It really is. And these inmates would be the first people to tell you.
They would be the first people, yeah. And they did really well. They worked really hard on their papers. There was everything was turned in on time.
So they still had assignments and everything?
Yeah, everything. It was it was supposed to use the exact same syllabus as you used on the main campus, the same grading curve, everything.
Wow.
It was a really impressive program. I encourage anybody to look it up.
What were some of the greatest joys that you had, as you look back on your teaching career? What were some of the things that you felt were most rewarding?
I loved the dynamic of, I had a very discussion-based classroom, so I wasn't the lecture for an hour and then dismiss the class.
I think on behalf of all students, we say thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the energy, the opportunity to expose students to writers, artists, thinkers that they had never considered before. I just thought it was such a privilege and so exhilarating, really. I mean,
Yes.
that to always be learning was extraordinary. I also think one of the things I taught was generational theory, and these are human constructs that you're a boomer, you're Gen X, you're Gen Z,
You're
whatever.
millennial, whatever.
Right. That you and we've convinced ourselves that we are so unique and so different from previous generations. And older people convince themselves that they're different from younger generations. And it goes both ways, that you would not have anything to offer. How could I mentor somebody? Or
Right.
how could I
How could I
advise
connect?
somebody? How could I connect? And the reality is we all wake up hungry. We all want to be loved. We all have had dreams that we've not embraced or dreams that we've lived into. We've lost jobs. We've gotten jobs. We have goals. We've fallen in love. We've been spurned. There's so many basic human things that we've all experienced. But we've convinced ourselves that we're so different because, just because a 17-year-old watches TikTok and a 77-year-old actually might watch TikTok. They're
True, with the
actually way
popularity
more,
of that
Yeah,
nowadays.
I
Yeah,
mean,
completely.
that's actually tech is a great equalizer too. But so again, and we talked a couple weeks ago about this, the loneliness that we've created, that we've convinced ourselves that we're so separate, that we have nothing to offer each other. Well, you're in a relationship, you're in love. I bet your grandfather would have something to say about that.
You're so right. And I just have to tell you, I am one of the people that is of the belief that I am so different than my parents and their parents. And even on, my own kind of question briefing that I have in front of me, I was going to ask, look, it feels like the gap between generations is getting wider and wider, and we're so different. We're more different now than we ever have been. Maybe that's the wrong question to ask, because maybe that's not that true.
I think so.
I think I look to prior generations, and maybe I have a bias to want to say they're different, because I want to feel like I'm facing a world that was more difficult than the world that they grew up in, or that I have different challenges that they can't relate to, or technology now is different. But I think, to your point, like, my mom grew up wanting to be loved, and she grew up, trying to get a job just like me and stumbling her way through her 20s. Like, ignoring all the kind of external factors, internally, like, across generations, going back as far as you want, we're all the same beings, just trying to find a place in this world.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And on a campus, you get to experience that. And I learned so much from them, but I mean, how often do we put ourselves in situations where we can learn from other generations? And there's so few places where we can do that in our world. So that was just a huge privilege. And I think the world was scary for them too. When you think about World War II, or
so right.
There's drafts and going to fight wars and civil rights. I think I was born during this civil rights conflicts in the 60s. And I just think I have asked my parents a couple times, like, what was it like to bring a child into the world when, things were scary and, there was a lot of ruckus then. And how did you feel confident bringing a child into the world then? And, it was scary for them.
Completely. It's funny. I actually have probably grown up at the easiest time ever in human history, comparatively.
Yeah.
Comparatively speaking, like, I actually, as I'm actively
No
reframing this
disease.
myself, no disease, any information I want, I have instantaneously. I can, travel fairly easily. I feel like, although sometimes I hyperfixate on, like, inflation, like the cost of everything is so high, everything is also available to me online. So, like,
Right.
let's say the cost
And it's
of...
not the first time inflation's blown up in America
100%.
or in the world.
Right. So you're working on a really interesting project right now, and I want to hear more about it. And I feel like this is especially relevant to me because I am in my, what I would call, miracle year.
Yeah.
What is a miracle year, and what is the Miracle Year Project?
Great. Thank you for asking. So my husband and I, Mark, have had a couple different careers and have had wonderful experiences in the church world and nonprofit world. And we're at a juncture in our life where we could just jump into the career that might be expected of us or the career that might be easy to step into. But we just decided to take a year to think about what it is that we actually want to do for the next chapter of our lives and whatever that might be. And for us, we're asking more career-wise, and some people might think of a hobby or something like that. But so we started thinking, like, this is a big question, so it requires a big amount of time. It's not like we're going to go have a weekend retreat and come back with all the decisions for the next chapter of our life. So we just decided, let's give ourselves a year. The inspiration came from somebody who wrote about Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein, very early in his career, was a patent clerk. So his work itself was not very demanding, but he focused his time on writing 4 different papers that created the basically foundation for his career and a lot of science for the next century in America. And so he didn't call it his miracle year, but when people referred to that, they looked back on that, they said this was his miracle year because these 4 extraordinary papers, like he never had that burst of creativity again. Everything else was based on that. So we thought, let's call this a miracle year project for us. And when we started telling friends and family about it, they said, well, I want to do a miracle year. I have a big idea. And this isn't like, how do I bake Christmas cookies or something like that? It's like, how do I cook through this entire cookbook? Or how do I start a podcast? My guess is you probably didn't go out one weekend and just set up shop here. And
No, I've been thinking about this. I'm 27. I've been thinking about this I'm 28. Oh my goodness. I've been thinking about this for 28 years. Let's put it that way. Right?
Okay. Well,
maybe since I was like conscious. So maybe like 26. But like truly, like this has been something that's been stirring for a long time.
And then there's people that have dreams and they live with them, or we met several people that said, I really want to start a business. I've had this idea, or I really want to lose weight, or I really want to shave some time off of my marathon score, my marathon time. But those big things take time. They're not those kind of smaller life adjustments. And there's no, I'm not putting those down at all or saying that those aren't important, but there's some ideas that just require time.
Yeah.
And so when people were saying, I want to start a business, or this is a big life change and I want to give it the time, one, to think about it, but seeds take time to plant or to grow. I have a Meyer lemon tree in my apartment. A lemon takes 9 months.
Really?
To grow. And so we thought, a lot of times we rush into an idea. The first month is really exciting. We get impatient. It's so hard. And we don't give things time to grow.
I've done that so many times in my life. I can't even tell you. Countless times. I have this bright spark. It burns bright for like 3 weeks. And then I get impatient.
Yeah.
And so I resonate completely with what you're saying.
Yeah. So this is kind of a coaching community.
Yeah.
It's like an online educational platform. We're writing a workbook to go along with this if you want to be part of a cohort. And we have 20-year-olds that are saying, like, I have an idea or a business I want to start. We have 40-year-olds that are saying, wow, my kids are in school. I've bought the house. I have the car. Now
I did all
need
this stuff.
Right. And now I really want to make some intentional career shifts that will be meaningful to me, that I can live into for the next chapter of my life. We have people that are entering into retirement and just thinking, I want to still have an impact in life, but I want to be intentional about it. Like, I could take all these volunteer activities, or I could do this. And there's all kinds of people that are asking me to do something, but what is it that I really want to do that I think would give my next chapter meaning? So it's been really exciting. I have a friend that says, I want to learn, she's a pianist. She said, I want to learn 15 Bach symphonias for the year. And can I be a part of your cohort to just be able to report to somebody, to have somebody cheer you on,
it's incredible.
to somebody say, month 6 is really hard and it's a gruel, and can I just have somebody to cheer me on and to also just say, you know what, you're at the hard part.
And this is like it's almost like it's consulting, it's a community, the community part I think is so understated, is like being part of a group of people that are all striving for something, even if it's not the same thing.
Right.
is so helpful and useful.
Yeah.
I think, I see a lot of people that are already successful on my social media feeds. I'd love to see more people that are like in month 6, to your point. I think this community is so helpful because people need to see that, things don't happen right away. And they need to, I guess, contextualize like, we're all in this together. Things don't happen overnight. And to have other people that can cheer them on and be like, hey, I know this week is hard. You're not getting the results you want, but trust and believe that if we all keep going, we're all going to make this thing happen together. That's really powerful. Really, really powerful.
Yeah. One of the things I learned as a professor and that I learned as a human being is that we learn from mistakes, but we so rarely share our mistakes, and we don't want to make mistakes. So when we do make them, we try to cover them up or keep them secret. And yet that's the knowledge, right? Every successful person that you were thinking of in your mind is successful because they made a whole lot of mistakes.
So true.
And you just don't know what they are, and they don't talk about them. But when people do talk about it, you lean in. You're like, oh, this is the good stuff. This is what's really interesting because it's real.
It's so real. And on the topic of community, I want to ask you, and we brushed over this topic earlier, but I meant to ask you. You mentioned how we had spoken on the phone a couple weeks ago about how I think people are very lonely these days. Community is so important, and whether it has to do with the advent of technology and social media or other reasons, I do think that there is a crisis of meaning and purpose and loneliness amongst maybe everybody, but I feel it especially with young people. I wonder if you have any perspective on that, why that might be, and how we can kind of work to break out of that.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, I think. And it's the Attorney General talked about it being an epidemic in America. So I think I look at young people and I think, well, gosh, you are the most connected generation, or you're with each other and you still, you've got all these great friend groups and everything. But the truth is we're all lonely.
We are.
And which is, I think, alarming as the report from the Attorney General, or the Surgeon General, sorry, not the Attorney General, the Surgeon General, Vitak Murthy, I think is his name. I think some of it is we've convinced ourselves that we're so different from each other that, like, what would the older lady down the hall have to do with me? Why would she want to go? Why would she want to know me, or why would I want to know her? And so we don't talk to people, and it's actually so much easier, and I do this too. It's just so much easier to go to my phone to go to a coffee shop and sit there and look at my phone. And where maybe 20 years ago, maybe I would have struck up a conversation with somebody.
Right. It feels like we have an easy out all the time, right? Even I do it all the time. If I'm even like at a bar where I should be conversing, like I'll just go on my phone.
Right.
And I think the phone is actually great for a lot of reasons, but it's bad for others. And I think, for as connected as we may think we are, given the advent of social media, like existentially, I feel alone. I do.
Yeah.
And I think that dichotomy is sometimes really hard for me to balance. It's like, on one hand, I have all these Facebook friends and all these Instagram friends.
Right.
Right. And I have all this flashy, cool stuff in my face. But then, at the end of the day, I don't necessarily feel part of a community.
Well, and we belong to communities at a much lower level. Like, people used to go to church. Some people believe, people were there for different reasons,
Completely.
but it was a community gathering, and a large portion of your social life came from that, and it mirrored your community life, whatever town you lived in, but it reinforced that as well. And so a lot of that's lost. Our suburbs, these towns that have great football teams and the whole town comes out, that's a community. You belong to something bigger than you. But that's the thing that the involvement in community organizations, institutions has decreased significantly. And that's something that I'm just trying to be a little more conscious of. Should I join a mahjong group or a book group, or, just go to a gathering at the library, or, there's all kinds of things. We're here in New York City, something at Bryant Park, like they play musical chairs in the summer.
Totally.
Why shouldn't I just go to that? Everybody else is a stranger and alone too.
And I think we discount the importance of some of those things. Like, for example, my father grew up in upstate New York. His whole family lived within a 4-block radius of each other. They went to church on Sunday. They had dinner twice a week together.
Right.
His
cousins
were all in the area, right? And they had friends, and all their friends knew each other's families. And, that's not to say that I didn't have a great childhood. I had a wonderful childhood, but I just think, like, we are living in a slightly more disconnected time. Like people are, family units and communities are much less nuclear today than they were many years ago. And so I think for me, that's something I wrestle with is like, I want to feel that way, but I think I convinced myself that as long as I have social media or funny shows on TV, right, or Netflix, that's enough.
Right.
And I think in the quiet moments where, you sit in bed at night and you're like, oh man, like maybe it's not. Maybe it's not enough. And this podcast affords me the opportunity to like reflect about this publicly. But that's one thing that I've been wrestling with is how can I feel like I'm part of something other than my small little quote unquote communities of social media. That's been hard for me.
Right.
And I think it's hard for a lot of other younger people too.
Yeah.
And whether or not I think a lot of people don't admit it, but I think a lot of people would agree, to be honest with you. I wonder what, maybe the way to solve it is to start putting yourself out there, right? Go to the Mahjong Club, go to Bryant Park, like just do things that you might think are weird or unusual, but like to become a part of a community makes you feel much more human, I feel like.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm curious, I guess, in closing, you've done so many things, and I have a feeling we'll do a round two. I already know I'm going to get so many people that come and say, she needs to come back. As you reflect back on your life and your career, like, are there any pieces of advice you give to young people or just generally things that you think might be applicable for, let's say, people in their 20s?
One, I would say, don't be afraid of change. It's scary. It's hard. It takes more work than you think it does. It takes saying goodbye to certain things, to certain people, and it's just so hard.
And it's really scary.
It's very scary. It just is. So it doesn't. It's not like, oh, I'm afraid of that. It is scary. Like it just is.
You're like, it's not an irrational fear.
Right. It's not
actually
irrational.
A scary thing.
It's not irrational. But that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing.
Yeah.
The right thing is often the harder thing and the scarier thing to do, or your next step. Your next best step is usually not the easiest thing. I think when I was younger, I thought, well, if it's right, it's going to feel easy. It's going to be fluid, and it'll just sail into that.
It's like I always thought if it was right, it would feel good.
Right.
Sometimes this doesn't feel good, but I know, like in my heart, I know it's right.
Right. And that's really hard. And that's such an easy deterrent. Like, I don't want to not feel good. I'm going to go back to the not feeling good feeling that I felt, what I know.
Totally.
I control. I know what that's going to look like. Another thing I would just say is I reached out to you about a podcast, and we're of different generations. Reach out to people and look, we're almost BFFs, right?
Yeah, you and me? No, really. Like, this is like a very special relationship that I feel like I would never have made if both of us hadn't taken leaps of faith.
Right. Yeah. And so talk to that person. Ask your grandmother. Say, I'm thinking about planning a trip to wherever, or the person down the hall, or just striking up conversations with people of different generations, or if you're thinking of starting a business, I bet there's somebody out there that's older than you that might have different advice than your peers.
As somebody who's trying to do this more in my life, as I strive desperately to figure out how to do this podcast thing and this business thing and just learn more about the world, like the more I go out of my way to meet people and like do the scary thing, the better I feel about my own life.
Yeah.
Like it's really, really scary, but then once you do it a little bit more, I feel like it's an exponentially greater impact than the scary feeling.
It will override your scary feeling. It is scary, but there's a lot beyond the fear.
Yeah. And I feel like people can take the extra step to try and join communities they might otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Right? I know for a fact that, I've actually joined, now granted, these communities are online, but I joined a philosophy community. We meet weekly. We discuss different readings and authors. It's been amazing, right? And now I have these friends that I would have never otherwise have made, and we discuss things that I adore my friends from home and my friends from college, but we don't talk about these things, right? And there's a piece of me that yearned to be fulfilled in a community that I didn't have. And now I have that community.
Yeah. I think there's nothing that beats in person, but the incredible gift and opportunity with online things is you can have the conversations that you want with people globally, and that connects you. And those relationships are real too.
So real.
Who you meet on the screen, and you can reach a lot of depth with people online that that you connect with that you may not actually see in person. So
absolutely.
I love that.
And then as far as the Miracle Year Project, where can people find it? Where can people find you?
MiracleYearProject.org.
miracleyearproject.org. And you are launching a podcast soon as well?
Yes. So if you have a miracle year, and you'll be my first guest, Mike.
Yeah.
But anybody that has a miracle year, and there are people that will tell you, you know what, this was a great idea, and it took a long time to develop, or I carried it for a long time, but to actually implement it takes time and work. And I'd love to hear that story.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for coming on. This has been one of the most unique discussions I've ever had on the show, and one that I'm grateful to have had. So thank you.
Yeah,
again.
me too. Thank you.